You're 18, standing in the garage, unboxing a Harbor Freight welder that cost $99.99 with a crooked workbench waiting. At the top of this ladder, a controlling stake in a structural steel company sells for $78.75 million. The smaller number buys a tool. The larger number buys control. Between them are beam lines, crane hooks, welding procedures, rejected parts, shipping lists, and years spent learning where errors hide. A clean square gets a nod from the person holding the other end of the tape. Before the first page shift, the work already teaches its hidden rule. Every cut, lift, fit-up, weld, release, and shipment can hide an error. The ladder grows when the size of the prevented error grows. This is every level of structural steel fabrication in America, from garage sparks to owning the shop. If you like breakdowns of how careers actually progress, like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Level 1. The Garage Spark. The only economic anchor is the same $99.99 receipt folded beside the welder manual. You drag angle iron across the garage floor and set it across the sawhorses. You lower the welding helmet, pull on gloves, and touch the ground clamp to bare steel. The angle grinder screams, then throws sparks under the workbench. You mark the cut lines with a tape measure, a square, and a silver paint marker. You cut each leg slightly long, leaving room for the grinder. You deburr every edge until the square sits clean against it. You clamp the frame tightly against the garage floor. You tack opposite corners, then lift the helmet. You compare the two diagonals with the tape. They don't match. You hit the corner with a hammer, pull the clamp tighter, and tack again. The square finally sits against both edges. You finish a side in a continuous run, and the frame rocks on the concrete. Bad sequence. You grind the welds back without touching the joint line. You start over with shorter runs. This time, you sketch, measure, mark, cut, deburr, clamp, tack, recheck square, weld, and finish in that order. Because you alternate corners and pause between short welds, the steel moves less, the legs sit flat, and the grinder stays on the bench where it belongs. You stop chasing a pretty bead, then it's quiet again. The finished bench holds the vise without rocking. Someone runs a hand across the top, checks the corners, and leaves it in the garage. Before every cut, you clear the cord and check where the sparks will land. The abrasive wheel meets the steel squarely instead of twisting in the kerf. A bright edge appears only after scale and burrs leave the joint. The clamp carries the force while your bare measuring hand checks the corner. A tiny tack preserves options that a finished weld would remove. You sight along the frame before trusting the concrete floor beneath it. Cooling steel clicks, while the short runs shrink from opposite directions. The second attempt uses patience as deliberately as the grinder. The vise becomes a test load, not a decoration on top. When the legs stay planted, the sequence has finally beaten the heat. Level 2 begins when someone pays you not to waste steel. Level 2. The Material Bay. The lower-end national benchmark sits at $17.39 per hour. Before cutting, you read the delivery paperwork and find the section size. The overhead crane pendant hangs from your hand. You inspect the hook, latch, and rated load marking. You check the sling for damage before it touches the beam. You keep both hands outside the pinch point and call the move. Then you land the steel against the stops. You match the heat number on the material to the shop record. You stretch the tape, check the cut list, and mark the length. You feed the member into the saw. The blade drops through scale and leaves a hot burr. You knock the burr down with a grinder. You paint the piece mark where shipping can see it. You route the shop traveler to the next operation. Receive, identify, inspect, rig, land, measure, process, mark, and release. The complete route with no room to swap the order. You rush once and copy the piece mark from the line above. The wrong member reaches the next bay. Stop the line. You trace the heat number, correct the traveler, and repaint the mark. The supervisor signs the release without sending the member to scrap. You start checking the heat number before the tape measure. The bay sounds the same. MRA surveyed 556 organizations covering 69,318 employees and 326 jobs. Andy Nielsen at Allied Steel in Lewistown, Montana, began by laying out and punching beamline holes before moving through welder, fitter, lead, and foreman work. The crane move starts with a clear travel path and one agreed signal. You stand where the load cannot pin you against the steel rack. The pendant controls motion, but the sling angle controls what the hook feels. Fresh-cut steel stays hot after the saw head rises. A wrong heat number can survive several operations before anyone notices. That is why material identity gets checked before a dimension. The traveler carries the member's history into every following bay. Paint marks face outward, so the shipping crew never has to guess. Releasing a member means the next worker can trust what arrived. The shop rewards the person who catches the mismatch before the blade. Level 3 begins when the drawing stops being someone else's problem. Level 3. The Fitter Fabricator. The national median benchmark is $49,900 per year. Now the shop drawing becomes the object in your hand, not background paperwork. You read the title block, revision, piece mark, and weld symbols before moving steel. You match the member to the drawing. You lay out a stiffener, base plate, and connection angles with a tape and square. You pull a chalk line across the flange. You set the plate against the layout marks. You use dogs, wedges, clamps, and a hammer to close the fit up. You add a strong back where the assembly wants to move. You check the root opening before making the tack. You open the approved welding procedure and verify the process. The Lincoln welding machine hums behind the screen. You preheat when the procedure requires it. You clean the joint with a grinder and wire brush. You strike the arc at the prepared joint. The puddle settles. You weld the assembly in the planned sequence. Then the flange starts to move under the heat. The strong back lifts against the clamp. The tack at the far end cracks across the toe. The inspector sees the movement and calls a hold. Everything stops. You stop reaching for the grinder before reading the repair direction. You reopen the drawing and compare the fit-up to the accepted condition. You mark the discontinuity and the distorted area. You gouge out the defect under the approved repair direction. You clean the groove until bright metal returns. You reset the plate with wedges, clamps, and a new strong back. You weld the repair in an alternating sequence. Because the repair follows the approved procedure and the dimensions return, the inspector closes the hold and the member moves with its traveler into the next bay. The acceptance stamp lands on the traveler. Then it's quiet again. The AWS Certified Welder pathway is performance-based, so the test is the weld placed in front of the examiner. Qualification continuity generally requires documented use of the process at least once every 6 months. Carmine Marcelli's published biography records that he began as a steel apprentice before later structural steel work and company ownership. The revision mark decides whether the geometry in your head is current. A weld symbol controls joint preparation before the electrode ever moves. You sweep a tape across the assembly and compare both ends again. Dogs pull the plate sideways while wedges lift it into plane. The strong back resists shrinkage only while every clamp remains seated. Root opening belongs to the approved procedure, not to personal preference. Preheat is checked at the joint instead of guessed from the room. Inner pass cleaning exposes slag before another pass can bury it. The arc follows the planned sequence instead of chasing easy access. When movement begins, the fit-up marks show exactly where it started. A hold protects the member from becoming an expensive field problem. Repair begins with written direction and ends with another inspection. Gouging removes the discontinuity without erasing the surrounding evidence. Bright metal returns before the replacement weld closes the groove. Final dimensions prove that the repair restored more than appearance. Level 4 begins when your mistake is no longer the sole problem that can stop production. Level 4. The hold point. The broad national benchmark for a first-line production supervisor is $65,930 per year. The shift starts at a whiteboard covered with piece marks, bays, and promised ship dates. You read yesterday's misses before assigning today's work. You give crane time to the heavy assembly and the open bay to the repair. You check that every station has the latest drawing. You verify the approved welding procedures at the screen. You open the qualification log before assigning the critical weld. You approve the first piece fit-up before repetition begins. The inspection gauge, flashlight, soapstone, and radio stay within reach. A radio call asks whether production can keep moving past an unchecked connection. You walk to the bay and look at the joint. You put a red hold tag on the member. The schedule slips. The part stays in the bay for correction. You stop raising your voice. You write the non-conformance report and identify the required disposition. You isolate the member so shipping can't load it. Maintenance locks out the machine before the fixture is adjusted. The fitter resets the plate against the drawing. The welder completes the approved repair. Because the team follows the hold, repair, inspection, and release sequence, the member ships clean, and nobody has to explain it at the erection site. Joe Pardo at JGM in Coatesville, Pennsylvania, moved from entry-level fabricator to estimator and project manager, then earned Certified Welding Inspector credentials. Under OSHA's welding standard, the firewatch can continue for at least 30 minutes where required. Combustibles inside 35 feet still keep the hot work controls active. Then the radio goes quiet. The huddle turns promised dates into specific bays, cranes, and people. You walk the line before the first repeated assembly multiplies a mistake. Current drawings sit at each station while obsolete pages leave the floor. Qualification records decide who receives the critical joint before work begins. A flashlight finds the edge that production speed would rather ignore. The red tag makes the stop visible to every passing forklift. Isolation keeps the held member from slipping quietly toward shipping. Maintenance owns the locked machine until the fixture is safe again. Release requires evidence that the repair and inspection both closed. Calm authority protects the schedule by refusing a larger failure later. Level 5 begins when the shop floor depends on information you release from an office. Level 5. The production office. The broad industrial production manager benchmark is $121,440 per year. No steel reaches you as commitments on a bid sheet. You open the contract scope and compare it with the estimate. You check drawing status before releasing material. You open the request for information log and find the unanswered connection. You build the advance bill of material. You issue the purchase order only after the grade and quantity match. The Tekla dashboard shows inventory, production status, and shipping sequence. The production board shows which bay will run out of approved work. The shipping list shows what the erection crew needs at the front of the sequence. A detail revision lands after material has been received. The old plate is already in the rack. No cut yet. You freeze the release and call the detailer. You update the drawing status on the production board. You reprint the traveler. You move the old plate back to inventory. Because the release stops before cutting, the shop loses minutes instead of steel, and the correct connection reaches the truck in erection sequence without a field correction. You start reading the schedule before the drawings. Then the phones go quiet. Deloitte surveyed 600 executives, and 92% treated smart manufacturing as a major competitiveness driver. 48% still reported moderate or significant difficulty filling production and operations management roles. Kevin Trainer's published JGM biography records that he helped grow another industrial company before moving into steel fabrication leadership. The load leaves in the order the field requested. Every office decision eventually becomes a physical condition on the floor. The estimate defines what the shop promised before the drawings were complete. Material releases wait until grade, quantity, and revision agree. Capacity planning gives crane time and open bays to the right assemblies. Purchasing follows the advanced material list without outrunning approved information. The unanswered connection stays visible instead of disappearing inside an email chain. Shipping sequence begins with what the erection crew needs first. A frozen release is cheaper than a cut plate with obsolete geometry. The updated traveler reconnects the correct drawing to the correct steel. Reliable data lets the manager protect both inventory and field sequence. Level 6 begins when the schedule, payroll, bonding, and quality system all carry your name. Level 6. The owner. The anchor isn't a salary anymore. You review the backlog report before the shop opens. You compare work in process with cash collected and steel already purchased. You read the bonding capacity letter before approving the next bid. You review the quality manual, insurance binder, and customer concentration report. You hire managers who can release work without waiting outside your office. The production board updates while you're in a customer meeting. You stop answering every radio call. The shop keeps moving. Joe Messner Jr. began welding in high school and later built JGM into a larger structural steel operation with an audited quality system. AISC 207-2025 governs the certification system, and updated governing requirements take effect June 15, 2026. A buyer opens the due diligence data room. Bank statements, backlog, work in process, qualifications, claims, customers, and equipment records move into folders. The stock purchase agreement covers 2.5 million shares at $31.50 per share. The cash consideration for control reaches $78.75 million. The share price builds the cash total. The cash total buys the controlling position. Because the procedures, managers, records, and customer relationships work without the founder at every station, the buyer can value an organization instead of the founder's labor. The weld is invisible, the system is not. Backlog quality matters as much as backlog size when margins and schedules tighten. Work in process ties steel, labor, billing, and cash into one moving picture. Bonding capacity limits which promises the company can safely make next. Customer concentration can turn one lost account into an empty production board. The quality system keeps decisions repeatable after the founder leaves the bay. Managers earn trust by releasing work without waiting outside the owner's door. Due diligence tests whether records match the business buyers were shown. A transferable company carries procedures, relationships, and judgment beyond one person. The final beat begins when the cheapest document in the office becomes the document nobody throws away. Final beat. The empty chair. The climb looks like welding from outside. From the top, it looks like a chain of prevented errors. The garage teaches that heat moves steel. The material bay teaches that identity matters before measurement. The fitting bay teaches that a drawing is an instruction, not decoration. The hold point teaches that stopping work can create more value than pushing it. The production office teaches that an approved release is also a physical tool. Ownership teaches that the shop must survive an empty chair. The whole ladder fits inside a receipt. It's the Harbor Freight receipt from the garage. It still reads $99.99. At level 1, it sits under the welder manual beside grinding dust. Now it sits in a frame behind the desk. A new helper sees it, while delivering a traveler for signature. He asks why anyone kept a receipt for a cheap welder. You tell him it predates the purchase orders, quality manual, audit packets, stock purchase agreement, and every approved traveler now filed in cabinets behind the desk. He nods, sets down the traveler, and goes back to the bay. The receipt never became the company. The sequence did. Next morning, you unlock the office after the shop has already started. The whiteboard is updated. The quality manager already has the hold log open. The production manager has the shipping list. A new fitter is comparing diagonals on a frame that still wants to pull out of square. Nobody waits for you to touch the steel. Each lesson widened the boundary around the error you were expected to prevent. The first boundary was a crooked frame, small enough to lift alone. The next boundary followed material identity through cranes, saws, marks, and travelers. Then it surrounded drawings, procedures, distortion, repairs, and inspection acceptance. Later, it covered people, current information, machine isolation, and promised ship dates. Finally, it reached cash, bonding, customers, records, and the empty owner's chair. The framed paper still carries garage dust beneath the glass. Its bent corner matches the fold beside the original welder manual. The helper sees a cheap purchase while you remember the first bad sequence. Outside the office, a crane moves because someone else checked the sling. A traveler advances because someone else verified the heat number. A held member waits because someone else chose evidence over speed. The organization repeats the sequence without borrowing the founder's hands. The front door key turns, the shop lights come on, and the name above the door is yours.